I concluded part one of this series with some stuff to talk about. Highlights from the past 20 years of SEPRO development, I believe, are important because it lays the foundation for the next 20 years. As I've tried to show, that intent, while being a very important and powerful development tool from a standpoint of throw and swing, is not the only, will in itself will not guarantee developing a player's maximum throw or swing capabilities. That there are other factors that are important, maybe as important, or if not so, more important than intent. And that's what I've been searching for the past several years. A What is it other than intent that needs to be done in order to develop a player's maximum throw and swing capabilities? And trying to be consistent with keeping things simple and conceptually simple, I was looking for the new word for the next 20 years, and I think I found something. And we'll find out more about that as we go along. And last but not least, the next 20 years begins with new insights on how the body throws the baseball. It's new from a standpoint, I think, for most people. It's not really new for me because it's stuff that I've been advocating for quite a while, and I believe is one of the key secrets to developing high-level throw, in particular high-level throwing capabilities. Words have always been very important to me. Early on in SEPRO, I used to almost every day resort to the dictionary to make sure that everybody understood the words that either I or someone else was using. Uh, Again, words are so important because it's our interpretation of the word that conveys the meaning. Uh, it's how we view the word, how we interpret the word, and putting words together. And you can have lots of words that don't really say anything. You can have a very few words that mean a lot. And in this case, this is a quote. It's from Winston Churchill, but it's not. He didn't originate it. As I understand it, it's George Santayana from Spain back in the 1800s, who really uh, was popular person who didn't say exactly this, but really was the originator of this phrase or this quote. And the quote I'm talking about is, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it," by Winston Churchill, who was a master at putting a few words together with great impact. 1995, the birth of SEPRO, and some of you may have seen this symbol. It's a vulture with a computer and a baseball sitting on a football, and there's a bunch of stuff running through his head, which has to do with scientific or math type stuff. The whole purpose here was to try and create an image for SEPRO. The vulture image was to symbolize the search for knowledge, the never-ending search that vultures circle and fly high with very keen eyesight, and when they see something good, they swoop down and grab it. And in this case, searching, flying high, looking for information, looking for knowledge, and then when we see it, we swoop down. And so that was 1995, the beginning of SEPRO. The beginning of SEPRO also coincided with what I would call the golden age of instruction. And the golden age of instruction came about because, in my opinion, two technological advances, if you will. The first being the VCR and second being the internet. And why do I call that the beginning of the golden age? Is because now, for the first time, you basically had your instructor at your fingertips, meaning instead of a book with pictures, whatever, you actually had somebody who was talking to you, demonstrating to you, and gave you much better, closer coupling between what the instructor wanted you to do and hopefully your ability to interpret that and do it. As an aside, as time went on, I also uh, developed the belief, the antithesis of the golden age, meaning that 1995 was the beginning of the end of developing high-level pitchers in the United States, mainly because now players, dads, coaches had something that gave them greater confidence to mimic, and that's the key word, mimic. So instead of going through a learning process from the books, from using your mind, from thinking things out, it was more they more readily accepted what they saw in the videotape, and in many cases, what they saw in the videotape, I do believe, was either not correct or very inefficient. My search for answers, I thought I knew something when I started SEPRO. I thought I knew, something. I had coached teams, my son's daughter, baseball, basketball, soccer, and whenever I undertook a coaching or any task, but in this case a coaching task, I went out and bought every book I could find and read everything I could find, videotape if they existed, so on and so forth. So I went into this thinking I had a reasonable foundation, but as I really started to get into it and really analyze it, the more I learned, the more I understood how little I knew. Speaking about words earlier, um, I this is not a quote, but something I've said very often in the course of SEPRO's history. We are only capable of seeing what we are capable of seeing, meaning that, again, I mentioned this previously, that it's our sum total of experiences, our education, what we've lived through, what we've done, what we haven't done, that filters what we see and what we hear, and our ability to quote understand and more importantly to implement. Um, there were two things that I had going for me. One is I was a relative newbie on the baseball scene from a standpoint of instruction. I was not a recognized. Was not a recognized name instructor. Therefore, I didn't have a lot of preconceived baggage that I had to carry. I was carrying around in terms of how the body swings and throws. And secondly, my technical background. To me, that's a significant advantage because my background is both in engineering, electrical engineering, and physics. It's a dual degree, and that allowed me to see things that other people really were not able to see. Then I had studied Russian training methods. In my days of track and field at the University of Massachusetts, I mentioned earlier, a library was my best friend when I was younger, and has continued to be my best friend throughout my entire life. I spent hours and hours in the stacks. That's what we call it, where the magazines were and the periodicals were, and went through every piece of literature I could find on Russian training techniques. This is where I was introduced to. This was back in 65 to 1970, 71, where I was introduced to Russian training methods using weighted implements, where they would use throwing implements, discus, shot put, javelin, that were either 20% heavier or 20% lighter than what the standard official weight of the implement was, in order to improve their throwing capabilities. Um, NEAT, which stands for Never Ending Athletic Trainer, was an early video analysis program, which was of tremendous help to me. I mean, that program, I can't say enough about it and what it allowed me to see, because I was able to take video, break it down frame by frame, be able to actually see frame by frame what was happening, and compare it to what people, instructors, high level people who were recognized as high level instructors, were saying was happening, and found out that in a lot of cases it didn't jive, it didn't add up. What they thought they were seeing or what they said was happening wasn't really happening. And last but not least, by far, that's probably the most important one of all, is motor learning and control. If you're trying to figure out how to throw a baseball, well, wouldn't it make sense that you need to know how the body acquires movement skills? And that's what motor learning and control is all about. And to me, that opened up my first book. Was Schmidt's theories, he's motor program theories on how the body acquires movement skills or achieves movement patterns. And that to me was unbelievable from my standpoint. I couldn't believe the stuff I was reading, and it just pulled together a lot of bits and pieces that I had experienced or knew about, through the years. So motor learning and control was probably and that's really where the whole concept of intent came from. Was my work that I had done in terms of the research I had done with motor learning and control. I couldn't get through the 95 to 2000 period without some names. During this time, the preeminent pitching person was Dr. Tom House, former major league pitcher turned pitching scientist, who had to his credentials, having worked with such notables as Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson. Of course, Tom House, a lot of tall and fall, goalpost, those types of keep things on a straight line, etc. Those were again mandates, dictums of the time in terms of how to optimally throw a baseball. And we have Dick Mills. Some of you old timers may remember some of the battles I had with Dick. Unfortunately, Dick passed away. What would be 2 years now in March, this coming March, from melanoma. Um, as many battles I had with Dick, he helped me a lot because the way I learned anyway, is to, if I didn't agree, to go and do as much research as I possibly could to find out whether I was disagreeing for the wrong reasons or I was disagreeing for the right reasons. So I give Dick all the credit in the world for that. And more importantly, from a Dick from 95 to probably 2001, 2002 ruled the instructional scene, because he had a son, Ryan Mills, who was a first round draft choice. And what dad didn't want to um, develop his son and have a model like Dick Mills, who was able to tell everybody weekly, monthly, how he developed his son, Ryan Mills, into a first round draft choice. We have Dave Hudgens, former major league player, from the hitting standpoint. Both Dick and Dave had a great marketing person who was able early on to secure domain names of www.pitching.com for Dick and www.hitting.com for Dave, so that when you went out to the internet to do a search, guess what popped up right away if you're looking for either pitching instruction or hitting instruction. And then Mike Epstein. Mike posted for a time on the SEPRO website. Former major league player, and his from an instructional standpoint, is pedigree or claim to fame. He was a protege of Ted Williams. And last but not least, we have Jack Mankin, who I would call an old guy like me who is obsessed with how the body swings the bat, and who has a website called still has it, www.batspeed.com. The state of 2000, the year 2000, state of pitcher training development, pretty much summed up: muscles and lifting weights are bad. The great fear of the pitcher becoming muscle bound, or even for that matter, the hitter becoming muscle bound. You really shouldn't lift anything heavier than something you can do 100 reps with. Do lots of running. That was probably the biggest training advice that people would get. Your arm is made of glass, which I blame the ASMI for that. I'm not really a proponent of the ASMI. I think they've been around for a long, long time and haven't really contributed to understanding as much as they could have about how the body optimally throws the baseball. And probably one of the worst ones from a standpoint of killing the potential of young players to become high-level pitchers is to concentrate on throwing strikes, and velocity will come, which is the general pitcher development mantra, even to this day. And again, I'll add to that in terms of going back. I should add this to my quote section, saying section. Another favorite quote of mine is, "The quickest way to ruin a young pitcher is to make him a pitcher." In 2003, I was invited by Brent Strom. At that time, he was the minor league pitching coordinator for the Montreal Expos, to come to spring training. I'd met Brent at a Ron Wolforth 2002 boot camp, and we became very friendly. Brent's a great guy. He's now the major league pitching coach for the Houston Astros. And Brent invited me down to Florida for Expo spring training to speak to, impart whatever wisdom I could impart. And there's a story about that, which is, I think, emblematic of why Major League Baseball is not anything close to having the knowledge to develop high-level players. This was getting toward the end of my time there, and it was also the time when they were making cuts to the minor league squad. And I remember quite clearly, there was a left-handed pitcher who he came up to me and he said, "Mr. Nyman, I've listened to some of the things you said, and I think, there's some interesting stuff. And, I know that he told me, he said, I know I'm on the bubble, and I've got one more game that I'm going to be pitching in before they make the cuts. is there anything you can help me with or advise me about? And I did. There were some things that I saw with him that I said, maybe if you try doing this. The next day, he had pitched that. He'd pitched the day before, and he came up to me. He was all smiles. So Mr. Nyman said, I had a great outing. I tried to do some of the things you told me to do, and I think it helped me. Well, later on that afternoon, Brent came up to me and said, Paul, you really can't talk to these players anymore. I said, Brent, what do you mean you can't? I can't talk to these players. He said, well, my director of player development came to me and said that he didn't want you talking to players anymore. What had happened, obviously, is one of the assistant coaches or whatever, somebody saw me talking to this player, maybe saw the player did well or whatever, and became intimidated or whatever else, and went to the minor league coordinator. And that was the end of my being able to talk to players. Just a good example of the insanity that exists at the professional level. The very first day that I got to the Expos Florida facility, Brent piled me into a car with one of his assistant coaches and sent me out to see Dr. Mike Marshall. Some of you may know Dr. Mike Marshall. Mike was a Cy Young Award winner. He was a Cy Young Award winner, PhD in anatomy and exercise science. Mike, I got to know Mike prior to my going, and I think it's one of the reasons why Brent shipped me over there to see Dr. Mike, because at this time, around this time, I was very, very interested in the instructional aspect of throwing, pitching, but I had nothing I had no claim to fame. I had no pedigree. So I talked to Mike about doing something together, and basically saying, I got some stuff I'd like to contribute, and you got the name, and let's see if we can put something together. And it really didn't work out. Mike had his own opinions on how to throw a baseball and so on and so forth. But anyway, I'd gotten to know Mike, and so Brent shipped me off to see Mike. Mike has a very different take on pitching mechanics. It's based mainly on his understanding of anatomy, not really anything to do with physiology or biomechanics or any of those, which I think are much more important than anatomy. His main he was mainly a proponent of trying to preserve arm health, arm care, so on, and he felt that force application in a straight line was the way to go, basically, along with what's called pronation pitching, straight line to home plate and pronation of the forearm wrist to throw the baseball. But what was also very interesting, he was a proponent of a very aggressive physical training for his players. Like I say, an interesting conundrum of sorts. In other words, pitching is bad or pitching is dangerous, but he was very aggressive with his physical training. Sort of a paradox of sorts, if you will. What you see here is an example of Dr. Marshall's throwing mechanics. You can see, if you take a look slow motion, you can see this player trying to do everything possible to throw the baseball in a straight line. And as I said, Marshall was very concerned about injury with the mechanics, and that's where he came up with his pronation drive line throwing mechanics. But as I said, what was as interesting, if not more so, was his take on training, meaning what he wanted his players to do.
Okay, so these are the wrist weights that we use. We will. These are tanks. They're 20 pounds. Collins, 20 pounds. Jason, 25 pounds. And these are mine, they're 3 pounds. Start out at 10 and work your way up to 30. Right now we're doing 96 reps every single day for 2 months straight, and a little less than 2 months. These guys are going to go up to 25. Jason will be on 30, and 30 is the maximum that you stay at, so I'll stay at 30 pounds. This is wrong foot, slingshot, screwball, go. wrong foot, slingshot, max line fastball, 20-pound wrist weights. 20-pound wrist weights, wrong foot, slingshot, curveball. Jason, how heavy are your wrist weights?
25 pounds.
Okay, cool. All right, go ahead. This is the full wind-up pseudo, or what are you doing? Drop out, wind-up, max line true screwball, 25-pound wrist weights. Max line, max line.
Joe, how heavy are those wrist weights?
30 pounds.
All right. Pendulum swing, wrong foot, max line screwball.
Okay, these are the iron and lead balls that we throw every day. This is these two are 10 pounds. This one is 12 and this one's 15. You start out at 6 and you work your way up to 15 pounds. These guys will, in about 3-4 months, will be up 12-pound iron ball. Jason will be up to a 15-pound ball very shortly, and I'm doing a 15-pound ball. Okay, Colin's gonna do. He's got a 10-pound ball. He's gonna do the loaded slingshot on wrong foot, and first is a screwball. Very good. Very good.
All right, we got Joe throwing a. How heavy is that ball, Joe?
15 pounds.
15-pound ball, and he's doing the wrong foot pendulum swing. He's gonna start off with the screwball.
So that gives you hopefully a good idea or a good feeling for what Marshall's program looks like. Very interesting, very unique program. Proceed with caution. I put this in here because from this point on we're going to talk about specific training regimens. When I say training regimens, ways that I've worked with players to hopefully implement better movement patterns to throw the baseball. The reason I say proceed with caution is because if you're a high school coach or college coach, you have a big problem typically. You have a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources, and you got a lot of players. Once a player gets to high school, especially once a player gets to college, it becomes very, very difficult to change how they throw the baseball. It's a ballistic event. It's called in motor learning, it's called a feed-forward event. You don't have conscious control over what you're doing because it happens so fast if you're throwing hard. Basically, it's all pre-programmed or predetermined based on what's called feed-forward concept. And trying to make changes can more times than not lead to disaster unless you have very tight control over that player and that player really buys into what you're trying to do and really understands what you're trying to do. On the other hand, where this may be a more advantage, bigger advantage to the coach of the high school, college, is recognizing things that the player is doing that are good that you may have a preconceived, based on stuff you've read or heard, notion that it's bad. In other words, the player is doing something that you think is bad, but in actuality is maybe good, as defined by what you're about to learn over the rest of this presentation. So that's why I say proceed with caution, and caution being trying to make any type of change to a ballistic pattern, such as throwing a baseball, can have dire consequences unless you have complete control over the situation. To be continued.